At a prestigious school in Atlanta, a group of students were making tasteless jokes in the hallways. But amidst laughter and cell phones recording, a white boy decided to humiliate his black classmate in front of everyone, without imagining that just a few hours later, fate would make him pay in the most unexpected and public way possible. This is a story about pride, prejudice, and the weight of one's own words. Before you find out what happened at that school and what left everyone in shock, like it, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell, because today, you'll see how destiny teaches better than any teacher. The morning sun streamed through the large windows of the Westbrook High School, one of the most prestigious schools in Atlanta. The sound of hurried footsteps echoed through the bright corridors, mixed with the hubbub of teenage conversation and laughter. It was the first day of presentations for the semester, and every student seemed excited, all but one, Daniel. Carter, a 15-year-old black boy, walked with his eyes down, holding a briefcase against his chest. Having recently transferred from a public school, he was one of the few scholarship students in his class. Intelligent, reserved, and polite, Daniel believed that this new beginning would be a chance to prove his worth. But he didn't yet know that some there weren't ready to accept him. Among the groups of students spread across the courtyard, one in particular caught attention. Led by Chase Miller, a 16-year-old white boy, athletic and popular, known by his father's influential surname, owner of a large construction company in the city. Chase had the kind of dangerous charisma, the kind that mixes charm with arrogance. Everything about him exuded confidence and contempt for anyone outside his circle. As Daniel walked past them, holding his new student badge, Chase looked him up and down and made a quiet but audible comment. "Look, everyone. It seems the school decided to do charity this year." Laughter echoed through the hallway. Daniel stopped for a moment, took a deep breath, and continued walking. He preferred not to answer, but his silence only fueled the malice of others. In the classroom, the teacher, Harriet Langford, organized the presentations. Each student should talk about what makes them unique. When it was Daniel's turn, he walked to the front of the class, adjusted his glasses, and began. "I believe that what makes us unique is not what we have, but what we do with what we have." The voice was calm, steady, almost too mature for his age. "I grew up watching my parents work hard, and I learned that respect is the foundation of everything, even when the world tries to make you feel inferior." For a few seconds, the room was silent. But then, from the background, Chase's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Yeah, especially when the world tries to teach you how to comb your hair, right?" The laughter was immediate. Some students looked shocked. Others just laughed nervously. Daniel was paralyzed for a moment. His heart raced, but he didn't let the tears come. The teacher reprimanded him. "Chase, that was unacceptable." He raised his hands, feigning innocence. "It was just a joke, teacher. Humorous jokes aren't funny. Apologize." Chase gave a mocking smile. "Sure. Sorry, champ." The sarcastic tone drew new giggles. Daniel returned to his seat in silence, feeling the weight of every gaze on him. But deep down, something inside him was beginning to shift, a mixture of pain and strength, of shame and the desire to prove he was more than that. At lunchtime, Daniel isolated himself in the corner of the cafeteria. He picked up his tray, sat alone, and watched the tables full of noisy groups. Chase was at the center of it all, as always, telling stories, laughing out loud, as if the world revolved around him. But that day, destiny had already begun to turn on its own. As Daniel ate in silence, Professor Harriet walked past the tables and watched. She noticed the boy's isolation, and something in her heart tightened. I knew there was a bigger problem there than just teenage pranks. And he decided to act, discreetly. That same afternoon, she scheduled a surprise activity for the class. "Tomorrow we'll have a pair presentation on empathy and coexistence. The pairs will be drawn." The students groaned, discouraged. But when Harriet began calling out names, the air seemed to change. "Chase Miller," she said, looking at the list. "Your partner will be Daniel Carter." The silence was absolute. Chase's friends exchanged glances, stifling laughter. Chase, incredulous, raised his voice. "Teacher, is this serious?" She just replied, very seriously, and I'm sure you two have a lot to learn from each other. Fate had just sealed the lesson that no one expected. News of the draw spread quickly through the halls of Westbrook High School. Everyone was commenting on how unlucky it was for Chase, the most popular boy in the class, to be placed next to Daniel, the quiet scholarship student he had ridiculed the day before. Some laughed, others just waited for the show. But no one imagined what was to come. The next morning, Chase walked into the room with the same arrogant smile as always. He threw his backpack on the table and, without looking at Daniel, said, "Let's get one thing straight, man. I'm not wasting my time on this project. You do the boring part, and I'll present it. That way, everyone wins." Daniel looked at him calmly. "I thought the topic was empathy. Chase them." "Yeah, and I'm being empathetic by letting you do the work." His friend's laughter echoed through the room. Professor Harriet, on the other side, pretended not to hear, but watched closely. I knew that forcing that coexistence was risky, but sometimes the deepest lessons are born from discomfort. Over the next few days, Daniel tried every possible way to make the project work. I took notes, suggested ideas, wrote the text. Chase, on the other hand, ignored everything. He arrived late, made fun of people's sentences, and made jokes during meetings. "Man, you take this too seriously," he said, laughing. "It's just a silly job." "Maybe for you," Daniel replied without raising his voice. "But for me, it's an opportunity to show who I am." "Then good luck. I've already shown you who I am," Chase replied, crossing his arms. Daniel took a deep breath. I knew arguing would be pointless, but inside, a flame began to grow, not of hate, but of purpose. On Friday, the day before the performance, Harriet announced a change. "Attention, class. The Empathy Project will be presented live, at the assembly on Monday, in front of all the students and the management." The murmurs began immediately. Chase glared at Daniel, furious. "Did you know that?" "No," the boy replied, "but we can make something good if we work together." "Working with you in public?" Chase laughed in disbelief. "Forget it." But the teacher noticed the resistance and approached their table. "Mr. Miller, the goal of this project isn't to show who's better. It's to show that we all have something to learn, including you." Chase looked away, irritated, and left the room without saying anything. Daniel sat there staring into space. He knew Monday would be difficult. But what he didn't imagine was that fate itself was already setting the stage for a turnaround no one would forget. Over the weekend, Daniel worked alone, created a touching presentation about respect and equality. He made slides, selected images, and wrote a moving speech about the importance of seeing beyond skin color. He spent hours reviewing, rehearsing, preparing. On Monday morning, he arrived at school early. The auditorium was being set up, the projectors were being tested, and management was arranging the chairs. When Chase entered, still reluctantly, Daniel approached. "I've prepared the material. We just need to rehearse." Chase snorted. "You don't understand, man. I'm not going up on that stage with you." But Harriet heard. "Yes, you will," she said firmly. "And you should know, the principal will be present and the presentation will be worth half your semester grade." Chase was speechless. He swallowed hard and nodded without a choice. The audience would be large. The cameras would film everything. And for the first time, he began to feel a cold that didn't come from the air conditioning. At the time of the event, the auditorium was packed. Parents, teachers, and hundreds of students filled the space, excited about the morning of presentations. Their names were announced. Next pair, Daniel Carter and Chase Miller. He, Empathy in the Modern School. The two went up on stage. Daniel held the notes, calm. Chase looked at the floor, uncomfortable. Professor Harriet, in the audience, watched silently. Daniel began, in a firm voice. "Empathy is what makes us human. It's when we look at others and recognize the pain we've felt, even if in a different way." The audience listened in silence. Chase just kept his gaze away, hoping it would be over soon. But suddenly something happened. Daniel clicked to the next slide, and a huge image appeared on the screen. A photo of him and Chase, taken by a colleague the week before. In the photo, Chase laughed mockingly, pointing at Daniel. The caption, written in large letters, read, "Empathy begins when the laughter stops." The audience held their breath. Chase froze. The entire auditorium fell. Silent. It was as if the universe had decided to project the truth in the most visible place possible. Daniel turned to the audience and said calmly, "This happened here, at our school, and I decided to turn it into a lesson, not a grudge. Because empathy isn't pretending nothing happened. It's having the courage to change after making a mistake." The audience began to applaud slowly until the sound filled the auditorium. Chase lowered his head, unsure where to hide his face. Harriet, thrilled, knew that fate had given its answer, without needing harsh words, just mirrors. And the lesson was just beginning. For a moment, time seemed to stop inside the auditorium. Westbrook High School. The screen remained static, displaying the frozen image of Chase laughing and pointing at Daniel. The sound of clapping echoed, mixed with murmurs, sighs, and glances exchanged between the students. Chase was still motionless. The face, once full of confidence, was now pale. His hands trembled slightly as he stared at his own giant reflection on the screen. There was no more applause for him, just the weight of what he had said and done. Daniel took a deep breath, feeling his heart pound. I didn't want to humiliate him, but I wanted the school to see what he faced every day. The laughter, the contempt, the silence. And now, for the first time, that silence became an ally. The teacher, Harriet Langford, sitting in the front row, watched in silence, her eyes filled with tears. I knew that moment was, bigger than any planned lesson. It was destiny taking shape. Simple, fair, inevitable. The director, Mr. Coleman, a serious and respected man, slowly stood up. The sound of his footsteps echoed all the way to the stage. He took the microphone, looked at the two boys, and then at the audience. "This presentation," he began in a deep voice, "is, without a doubt, the most powerful we have ever had at this school." He paused. The audience remained absolutely silent. "Daniel, I want to thank you. You turned pain into learning. And Chase," he looked directly at the boy, "I hope you understand what that really means." Chase didn't respond. His gaze fixed on the ground, his pride shattered. The room, which had previously vibrated with his jokes, now watched him with disappointment. Mr. Coleman continued, "Westbrook has always prided himself on academic excellence, but today we learned that character is worth more than any grade." The applause returned, now louder, more sincere. Daniel looked at the audience and, for a moment, felt something he had never felt there before. Respect. Not out of pity, but out of merit. After the event, the corridors were buzzing with comments. The students who had previously followed Chase now avoided him. Those who laughed at the joke now felt complicit in something shameful. "Dude, did you see Chase's face? I've never seen the director speak like that to anyone." Daniel did well. Very brave. Conversation spread like wildfire, and Daniel's name echoed through the halls, no longer as the scholarship student, but as the boy who had the courage to say what everyone pretended not to see. Chase, on the other hand, spent the rest of the day silent. He walked through the corridors like a shadow. His friends walked away, and even his teachers looked at him with a mixture of disappointment and pity. When he was leaving, he stood in front of the mirror in the bathroom. He placed his hands on the sink and stared at his own reflection for several minutes. The laughter he used to wear like armor was gone. In its place, there was shame. Pure, raw, relentless. Outside, Daniel paced the courtyard, feeling the weight of the day finally lift. Emily, a colleague who had witnessed the whole thing, approached. "You were amazing, Daniel." He smiled without arrogance. "I only told the truth. But weren't you afraid?" "I did," he replied. "But fear is the first step to courage." She nodded in amazement. As they walked together, they saw Chase, sitting alone on a bench, staring into space. Daniel paused for a moment. He could have scoffed. He could have ignored it. But he didn't. He just watched him and moved on. Chase's real punishment didn't come from Daniel's words, nor from the principal's scolding. It came from the mirror, of that image he could never erase, the reflection of one's own prejudice projected before everyone. The next morning, the school was still talking about what had happened. Harriet received dozens of messages from parents and students praising the class's courage. Some even suggested that the presentation be used as an example at future events. But the teacher, silent, knew that the most important lesson was not on the stage. It was inside each person who witnessed it. And though Chase's punishment seemed complete, fate still had something more in store. Something that would show, even more shockingly, that true repentance requires more than shame. It requires change. 2 days had passed since the episode in the auditorium, but the name Chase Miller still echoed through the corridors of Westbrook High School, now no longer as the popular kid, but as the living example of shame. The video of the presentation had been recorded by several students and was already circulating among classes, messaging groups, and even local profiles in the city. Thousands of views, thousands of comments, and they all said the same thing. The black kid gave a lesson in empathy, and the other got what he deserved. Chase, on the other hand, just wanted to disappear. He didn't eat properly, avoided looking his teammates in the eye, and started missing basketball team practices. The easy laughter was gone. Now, he walked with his shoulders hunched, trying to go unnoticed through the same corridors that had once been his stage. But the more he tried to run away, the more the memory haunted him. Every time he saw the reflection of his own face in some glass, he remembered the screen, the photo, Daniel's calm gaze, and that hurt more than any scolding. On Friday morning, Chase arrived at school early. The sky was still gray, and the corridors were almost empty. He entered room 203, where he knew he would find the teacher, Harriet Langford, who always arrived before everyone else. "Teacher," he said hesitantly. She looked up from her coffee and stared at him in silence for a few seconds. "Chase," she replied, cold but controlled. "What do you want?" He took a deep breath. "I wanted to apologize. Not just to Daniel, but to everyone." The teacher put down the cup, surprised. "It's a good start, but apologies are only valid when they're accompanied by action." "I know," he replied. "That's why I wanted to do something, a presentation of my own." "A presentation?" "Yes," he said, staring, "on the same stage, in front of everyone." Harriet studied him for a moment. There was sincerity in his gaze, but also fear. Still, she knew when regret was truly coming. "Okay," she finally replied. "Monday, General Assembly. You'll have 5 minutes. But know this, Chase." She leaned closer. "Forgiveness isn't something you ask for. It's something you earn." The weekend was quiet. Chase spent hours writing and erasing words. He didn't know what to say, nor how to redeem himself. But little by little, he realized that what he needed to do wasn't justify himself. It was to assume. On Monday, the auditorium was full again. The students whispered, curious about the surprise announcement scheduled by the administration. Daniel was also there, sitting next to Emily, unaware of what was about to happen. When the director took the stage and called Chase's name, the murmur grew louder. The boy walked slowly to the center, without the arrogance he had before. He wore simple clothes, his hair was disheveled, and his expression was serious. He grabbed the microphone and took a deep breath. "I know a lot of people don't want to listen to me. And you're right." The audience fell silent. "I said horrible things. I was cruel to someone who had never hurt me, all to appear superior. But the truth is," he hesitated, "I did it because I didn't know how to deal with people who were different from me." The words echoed, heavy, honest. And when I saw my face on that screen, for the first time I saw myself as I really was. Not the popular one, not the funny one. I saw someone small, and it destroyed me. Harriet watched from the audience, thrilled. Daniel kept his gaze fixed on him, expressionless. Chase continued, "That's why I wanted to do something today. I want to give back what I took. The voice I tried to silence." He signaled to the sound technician, and the screen lit up. But this time, it wasn't a picture of humiliation. It was a new video. It showed photos of Daniel participating in competitions, helping classmates, delivering books to a community library. Images that few knew. In the background, Chase's voice narrated, "This is Daniel Carter, a student who taught war. Me, without realizing it, what it means to have true strength." I laughed at him, but fate should have laughed at me. The video ended with the phrase, "Empathy begins where pride ends." The entire auditorium was silent for a few seconds, and then burst into applause. Not applause of celebration, but of recognition. Daniel slowly got up, walked to the stage, and stopped in front of it. "You've really changed," he said. Chase swallowed hard. "I'm still learning." Daniel held out his hand. Chase hesitated and squeezed her. The audience applauded once more, standing up. But in that gesture, there was more than forgiveness. There was proof that the heaviest punishment anyone can face is seeing yourself as your own mistake and still choosing to change. And from that day on, the entire school began to understand the true meaning of the word equality. After the public apology, something profoundly changed within the Westbrook High School, not just between Chase and Daniel, but between, everyone. Conversations in the hallways were no longer about who had the most followers or who wore the most expensive clothes. Now the subject was different: respect. The teachers noticed the difference. Students who previously ignored each other began working together. Offensive jokes that previously went unnoticed were now corrected instantly, and at the center of it all were two unlikely young men, a white boy trying to make amends for his mistakes, and a black boy who had the courage to forgive. The following week, the director, Mr. Coleman, called an extraordinary meeting. In the auditorium, in front of teachers and coordinators, he announced something that no one expected. Starting this semester, Westbrook High will create a permanent integration and diversity project. It will be called Bridges. He paused. And the coordinators will be two students who proved in front of everyone what it means to transform pain into learning: Daniel Carter, Chase Miller. The applause was immediate, but among the looks there was surprise. Some thought it was risky, others inspiring. Daniel and Chase looked at each other, aware of the weight of that responsibility. In the following days, they began to work side by side. At first, the silence was still uncomfortable. The memories of the humiliation, the video, the shame, it all still hung in the air. But little by little, dialogue began to fill the space that prejudice had left empty. Daniel came up with ideas for campaigns and lectures. Chase organized events, contacted the administration and students from other classes. With each conversation, a little of the pride disappeared. One afternoon, as they were adjusting the posters in the main hallway, Chase broke the silence. "You know, I still think about that day in the auditorium." Daniel looked at him. "Me too. You could have destroyed me, and everyone would have applauded." Daniel replied calmly, "And what would that change?" Chase was silent for a few seconds. "It would change what people think of me, but not what you think of yourself," concluded Daniel. That sentence echoed in Chase's mind for the rest of the afternoon. It was simple, but it carried the power that only truth has. The project Bridges grew rapidly. Soon, students from other schools began visiting Westbrook to participate in activities. Debates, theaters, exhibitions, and even community actions were created. The school that was once in the spotlight on social media because of a shameful video was now recognized for promoting empathy and inclusion. During one of the lectures, Daniel went up on stage and spoke in front of hundreds of students. "We don't choose what others say about us, but we do choose what we do with it. Hatred is loud, but respect is more lasting." Chase, sitting in the audience, watched him in silent admiration. He no longer saw the boy he made fun of. I saw a leader, a friend, someone who had unintentionally freed him from something much deeper than a mistake of oneself. A few months later, the Atlanta city government awarded the school official recognition for its anti-racism initiatives. The mayor, present at the ceremony, mentioned the names of the two students who started it all. And as the audience applauded, Chase turned to Daniel and whispered, "I think fate has now finished its lesson." Daniel smiled. Destiny only ends when we stop learning. The next day, the two returned to their normal student routine. They walked through the corridors, laughing at simple things. And as they passed the notice board, they saw a printed photo with the title, From Prejudice to Partnership, How Two Students Changed an Entire School. Chase stopped and stared for a few seconds. I never thought that one day my name would be on something like this. Life is funny, Daniel said. It starts by testing you and ends by teaching you. The two walked away, talking, while the corridors filled again with voices, footsteps, and dreams. But there was something different now, an atmosphere of lightness, of collective learning. The kind of change that doesn't fade with time. And so the Westbrook High became a symbol, not because of his wealth, nor because of his grades, but because, inside a classroom, a mistake became a legacy, and an act of prejudice gave rise to the most powerful lesson a school can teach, that empathy is the most beautiful punishment that fate can apply. 5 years had passed since the Bridges Project. Brianne. Westbrook High School had changed so much that she seemed like another person. Hallways once marked by divisions and cruel laughter now featured colorful murals with phrases of empathy, respect, and unity. And in the center of the main hallway, a sign gleamed in the sunlight. Here, we learn that no one is better than anyone else, just different enough to teach something new. Signed, Daniel Carter and Chase Miller. Since then, their story had become legendary among the students. Every year, new. Students heard the same narrative. The boy who laughed and the boy who forgave. But that autumn, fate decided to write the final chapter. The school organized a special event, the Day of Honor, dedicated to former students who had left a legacy. Guests from various generations would attend, and among them, 2 names stood out on the list, Daniel Carter and Chase Miller. The first one now had a degree in psychology and worked on social projects aimed at young people in vulnerable situations. The second, Chase, studied communications and dedicated himself to speaking about bullying and prejudice in public schools. Both had followed different paths, but were connected by the same invisible thread, the thread of learning. That morning the gym was packed. Balloons, banners, soft music. On stage, the director, Mr. Coleman, already with gray hair, spoke into the microphone. Today we celebrate something that goes beyond grades and trophies. We celebrate people who taught us that true. Greatness lies not in being admired, but in having the courage to change. He paused, looked at the audience, and smiled. I'd like to call to the stage 2 former students who proved with their lives that forgiveness is stronger than hate. Please welcome Daniel Carter, Chase Miller. The gymnasium erupted in applause. The two climbed up side by side, smiling. But in everyone's eyes, there were still echoes of the past. It was impossible to be there without remembering the first day of school. The cruel joke, the photo projected on the screen. But now, that same stage was a symbol, not of shame, but of overcoming. Daniel took the microphone first. When everything happened, I thought about giving up. I thought this place would never accept me. He paused and looked around. But I learned that school isn't made of walls. It's made of people. And people can change. The audience applauded, moved. Chase then approached. I'm living proof of that, he said with a shy smile. I thought being popular meant being strong, but I discovered that true strength is admitting when you're wrong. His words echoed throughout the gym. No one blinked. What I did to Daniel shames me to this day, but I never stopped remembering what he did to me afterward. He forgave me, and that changed my life forever. A respectful silence filled the room. In the front row, the teacher, Harriet Langford, now retired, watched with tears in her eyes. That moment was the culmination of the lesson she had begun. Years ago, a lesson that had gone beyond the confines of the classroom. When the applause died down, the director presented them both with a plaque of honor. The medal reflected the gym lights and was engraved with the words, "For turning shame into wisdom and error into example." Chase looked at Daniel and smiled. I never thought that one day we would be honored for this. Fate has a very peculiar sense of humor. Daniel replied, laughing. They hugged amidst a shower of applause, but that hug wasn't from ordinary friends. It was the embrace of two sides of the same story, that of error and that of forgiveness, that of pride and that of empathy. Later, after the event, Daniel walked alone through the halls. He passed through the old room where it all began. The late afternoon light streamed through the window, illuminating the empty desks. He smiled, his heart feeling light. Chase walked over and stood beside him, silent. "Strange, huh?" he said. "It all started here." "Yes," Daniel replied. "And it ended here, too." Chase looked at him and smiled. "It's not over. We just passed on the lesson." The two left together as the golden sun tinted the walls of the school. Behind them, the echo of the new students' voices filled the air, the sound of a different generation, born from the story of a mistake turned into redemption. A few weeks after the ceremony, Daniel and Chase decided to do something they had been putting off for a long time: visit the woman who, years ago, had changed the course of their lives. Professor Harriet Langford. She had retired and now lived in a small house in suburban Atlanta. The garden was simple but well kept, full of flowers that she grew herself. The same care he once dedicated to teaching, and to believing that even the ugliest mistakes could blossom into something beautiful. That afternoon the sky was golden. The two parked the car in front of the house, and for a few seconds they were silent. "It feels like no time has passed, does it?" Chase said nervously. "Time has passed, yes," Daniel replied. "We just don't realize when he's teaching us." There was a knock at the door. A soft voice answered from the other end. "Going?" When she opened it, for a moment time stopped. Harriet still had the same kind, steady gaze, now framed by white hair. When he saw the two of them, he smiled as if he had rediscovered a vivid memory. "My boys," she said, overcome with emotion. "I knew this day would come." She invited them in. The house was full of books, old paintings, and photos of students. On the shelf, a frame caught the eye. A photo from the old Bridges project, with Daniel and Chase side by side. "You were my greatest lesson," Harriet said, pouring coffee. "And honestly, the hardest too." Daniel smiled. "You taught us more than any book." "No, Daniel," she replied. "I just created the space. You were the ones who made the change." The atmosphere was light, nostalgic. They talked about school, the students, and the direction of life. But at one point, Harriet got up and walked over to a drawer. From there, he took out a yellowed envelope. "I've kept this all these years," she said, handing it to Daniel. "It was supposed to be read that day, after the assembly, but I thought it best to wait." Daniel opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a handwritten letter in firm handwriting. "To whom one was once wounded, and to whom one once wounded. Life is a cycle of mistakes and forgiveness. One learns from pain, the other learns from regret. The important thing is that both learn. May this episode never be remembered as a shame, but as the day when two young people proved that human beings are greater than their mistakes." Professor Harriet Langford, 2019. When Daniel finished reading, the room fell silent. Chase discreetly wiped away a tear. "Did you write this on the same day as the video?" "Yes," she replied. "Because I knew fate would end the story. I just didn't know when." She got up and walked over to a bookshelf. He took out a small wooden box and handed it to the two of them. Inside it were two golden pens engraved with the name, Daniel Carter. A vase, Chase Miller, O Eco. "You were two halves of the same lesson," Harriet said. "One talked, the other listened, and in the end, you both taught." The two of them sat in silence, absorbing every word. Daniel held the pen carefully. Chase, moved, said, "I will never forget this." Harriet smiled. "No need to. Promise. Just keep teaching." When they left the house, the sun was already setting behind the trees. The sky was tinged with orange hues, as if nature itself wanted to end the day calmly. The two walked to the car, but before getting in, Daniel looked back. Harriet stood on the porch, waving with a serene smile. "She still seems to see more than we let on," Chase commented. "That's what good teachers do," Daniel replied. "They see what the future will bring." The two got into the car and drove. Down the road in silence. The radio played soft music and the wind blew in through the open window. No words were needed. They both knew that that meeting had closed the last circle that destiny needed to draw. Months had passed since his reunion with Professor Harriet, but the impact of that day still echoed in his mind. Daniel and Chase. Her every word, every gesture seemed to have rekindled something in them both. A silent desire to continue transforming the world, one student at a time. And it was precisely this desire that led them to a new destination. One sunny afternoon, Daniel received an unexpected call. The number was unknown, but the voice on the other end sounded official, almost solemn. "Good afternoon, Mr. Carter. This is the Georgia Department of Education." He swallowed hard. "Yes, it's me. We are pleased to inform you that the Bridges Project, created at Westbrook High, has been selected to receive the State Award for Empathy and Educational Diversity." Daniel was speechless. "That's unbelievable. We'd like you to attend the ceremony. Oh, and bring the project's co-founder, Mr. Chase Miller." After hanging up, Daniel stood there for a moment, trying to process what he had just heard. He smiled. Fate, once again, was writing its lines with irony and gratitude. The following week, the event took place at Atlanta's Grand Municipal Auditorium. The lights, the cameras, the guests. It was all reminiscent of those old school assemblies, only on a much larger scale. But the nervousness was the same. This time, however, the two took the stage not as student and offender, but as companions of purpose. Chase, adjusting his tie, looked at Daniel and said in a good-natured tone, "Funny. I used to go up on these stages to look important. Now I go up to give thanks for not being the same idiot I used to be." Daniel is crying. "That's what they call evolution." "No," Chase replied, smiling. "That's what they call divine justice with a touch of humor." They both laughed, and for a moment, the weight of the past felt light. When their names were announced, the audience rose to their feet in applause. The presenter read part of the quote justifying the award for transforming an experience of prejudice into a movement of hope and inclusion, teaching thousands of young people that respect is the greatest instrument of change. Daniel took the microphone first. His voice was firm, but thick with emotion. "Years ago, I stood on a stage like this with fear, trying to prove my worth. Today, I stand with gratitude, knowing that a person's worth isn't measured by what they have, but by who they choose to be." The cameras captured every word. Chase then stepped forward. "I didn't deserve to be here, but I learned that regret only makes sense when it turns into action. The Bridges Project was born from a mistake, but what began as a wound became a bridge that today connects people who once hated each other for no reason." The audience gave a standing ovation. Harriet, present in the audience, discreetly wiped away her tears. She didn't need to say anything. I knew this was the closing of the lesson that had begun years before, and that now, finally, had reached the world. After the event, journalists approached to interview the two. A reporter asked, "What would you say to young people who are experiencing similar situations in schools today?" Daniel replied without hesitation, "I would say don't let hate define who you are. Every learner. Humiliation is a choice. You can be a reflection of it, or the opposite." Chase completed, "And to those who made the mistake, I'd say the same. Change is possible. But first, you need to have the courage to look in the mirror." The words went viral. The next morning, the video of the interview was on all the news portals. Thousands of comments were piling up. "Inspiring story. I cried at what these two had become. Now that is true redemption." Weeks later, the Department of Education decided to include the Bridges Project as a model to be replicated in schools throughout the state. Daniel and Chase have received invitations to speak at universities, conferences, and educational events. And for the first time, their name was remembered not because of a mistake, but because of a quiet revolution. At the close of one of these talks, Daniel looked at the audience and said, "Prejudice only wins when silence is greater than the truth." He paused, looked at Chase, and smiled. And our truth was simple. Forgiveness changes the world. That night, on his way home, Daniel looked out the car window and saw the city lights spreading across the horizon. Chase, in the passenger seat, commented, "You know what's crazy?" "What?" We only won this award because one day I decided to be an idiot. Daniel is crying. Sometimes destiny needs a mistake to start a right story. The two laughed, the sound of the engine mixing with the night breeze. And there, amidst lights and memories, they realized that the punishment that fate had meted out years ago was never about pain. It was about transformation. It was a sunny spring morning when Daniel and Chase returned to Westbrook High School. There was something nostalgic in the air, the distant sound of bells, the smell of coffee wafting from the cafeteria, the same hallways that had once been the scene of shame, pain, and overcoming. But now, every wall seemed to carry the echo of something different: respect. Right at the entrance, they saw a large new mural with photos, phrases, and drawings made by the students. At the top, in colorful letters, it read, "Bridges Project, Empathy Unites Us," and right in the center, a photo of the two of them. Daniel smiling shyly, and Chase beside him, holding a microphone. Below the image, a hand-painted phrase: "To err is human. To acknowledge is courage. To forgive is wisdom." Daniel stopped for a few seconds in front of the mural. "I never thought I would see something like this," he murmured. Chase smirked. "Neither do I, especially with my face plastered all over the school wall." They both laughed, but there was emotion in both of their eyes. That place, which once represented pain, was now a symbol of learning, and this transformation was the greatest prize that destiny could offer. They were soon greeted by S.R.A. Collins, the new director. "It's an honor to welcome you both back," she said, shaking their hands. "What you started here has become part of our culture. Every new student learns about your history in the first week of class." Chase's eyes widened in surprise. "Do you tell this every year?" "Yes," she replied, smiling. "Not as a scandal from the past, but as a lesson in humanity." As they walked through the hallways, they saw posters with phrases of empathy scattered everywhere. In the classrooms, teachers talked to students about inclusion, respect, and coexistence. It was as if every corner of the school had absorbed the message left. Years ago, in the courtyard, a group of teenagers were preparing a small event. Upon seeing Daniel and Chase, one of the students shouted, "Hey, it's them! The guys from Project Bridges!" Suddenly, the entire group surrounded them, excited. "Did you really study here? Is it true that your video went viral? What was it like forgiving someone who humiliated you like that?" Daniel laughed, surprised by the sincerity of the questions. "It was hard, but forgiving isn't saying what happened was right. It's saying you don't want to carry that with you anymore." The students looked at each other, impressed. A girl raised her hand. "And you, Mr. Miller? What made you change?" Chase thought for a moment before answering. "The day I saw the photo on the screen, I realized I wasn't laughing at others. I was laughing at myself, at the horrible person I was becoming. And in that moment, the laughter lost its charm." The group fell silent, absorbing every word. One of the boys, visibly moved, commented, "I've been bullied here before, but today, school is different." Daniel smiled. Then it was worth it. After the conversation, the director took them to the auditorium, the same one where it all began. The new chairs, the shiny floor, the changed curtains. But the stage was the same, and in that instant, the two fell silent. Daniel took a deep breath and said, "This is where the pain began, and where the healing also began." Chase nodded. And to think that one photo was enough to change everything. "It wasn't the photo," Daniel replied. "It was the courage to face what it showed." The two of them stepped onto the stage and looked at the empty space. The silence there was different now. It wasn't heavy, it was respectful. And in the air there seemed to be something invisible, as if the past was there, watching, smiling. When they left the auditorium, students were waiting for them at the door, with flowers and a small handwritten sign. "Thank you for teaching us to be better." Daniel felt a lump in his throat. Chase just took a deep breath and said, "Man, I never thought that the worst day of my life would become the most important for so many people." "Fate loves ironies," Daniel replied, laughing. And this was the most beautiful of all. They took pictures with the students, talked, laughed, and for a few minutes, time seemed to not exist. There, between the past and the present, pain and learning became one thing: purpose. The late afternoon gilded the courtyard of Westbrook High School, and the light breeze made the leaves sway over the old sports field. Daniel and Chase sat on one of the wooden benches, watching the students disperse after the event. The sun was hiding behind the buildings, painting the sky in orange and violet hues, the same scene of so many memories that now seemed, at the same time, distant and eternal. "Funny, huh?" Chase said, breaking the silence. "We spent years trying to forget this place, and now we don't want to." "Leave," Daniel smiled, looking at the horizon. "I think it's because, deep down, this place was never the problem. It was us." Chase nodded slowly. "Yeah, and it seems like only now have we really learned our lesson." But at that exact moment, a familiar sound echoed through the hallway. Slow steps, supported by a cane. When they turned around, they saw a figure they hadn't expected to see there again: Professor Harriet Langford. She walked with the calm of someone who carries time in her hands. "I knew I'd find you here," she said, smiling. Daniel stood up immediately, excited. "Teacher, how did you know we were here?" "A principal told me. And let's face it, I wouldn't miss the chance to attend my last class." The three of them laughed. She approached the bench and sat between them. For a moment, time seemed to go back. Three people, sitting on the same floor where the pain once began, now united by something infinitely greater. Harriet looked around, taking in the murals, the posters, the smiling faces of the new students. "When you guys were fighting here, I thought I was failing as a teacher," she confessed. "But now I see that the fault was my haste. The deepest lessons take years to blossom." Daniel nodded, excited. "You planted more than you taught, and you watered it with repentance and forgiveness," she replied. "That's how learning becomes a legacy." Chase lowered his head for a moment. "I never really thanked you, teacher." "No need," she said, placing her hand on his shoulder. "You've transformed, and that's the greatest thank you a master can receive." The wind blew softly, carrying the distant sound of laughter from the court. Harriet looked up at the sky and smiled. "Do you know what I realized after so many years?" "What?" asked Daniel. "That the class never ends," she replied. "It just changes places." The three of them sat in silence, watching the sunset. That moment was simple, but it had the weight of a lifetime. There was no longer offender or victim, no longer shame or guilt, just three people connected by a story that time has transformed into eternal learning. As the sun disappeared completely, Harriet slowly got up. "I must go, my boys. I have another garden to tend to." "Are you going back to teaching?" Chase asked, smiling. "Always," she replied, pointing to their chests. "But now my lessons live inside you." She walked away slowly, disappearing into the soft afternoon light. Daniel and Chase watched until his silhouette blended into the horizon. Neither of them said anything, because some goodbyes don't need words, just silence and gratitude. The next morning, Westbrook unveiled a new sign in the main hallway. In gold letters it read, "In memory of Harriet Langford, the teacher who turned mistakes into bridges and pain into wisdom." And just below, written in small handwriting, "Class never ends." Daniel and Chase returned to the school several times in the following years, always bringing new stories, lectures, and learnings. But on each visit, they made a point of passing through the corridor where it all began. They stopped in front of the sign, in silence, and left flowers. There, between the memories and the distant sound of the new generations, the past and the present met and forgave each other. True learning does not come from victories, but from the failures we have the courage to face. Every mistake is a seed that time can transform into wisdom, and life is just one long lesson that never ends.